Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. It's been a little while. I have not uploaded videos over the last few days. I was away at a wedding, so we took a little bit of a break here towards the end of this EEVEE Grove season, of this EEVEE Grove metagame, and it's been a lot of fun. I think that this is definitely one of the most diverse metagames that we've ever seen. Today, we're going to be going over the final standings, the results of the Ursa Days Pocket Weekly number 35. Crazy that they have ran 35 of these tournaments. Big shout out to everybody that works on these tournaments and everybody that covers all of the smaller tournaments as well that we may not, of course, talk about that much on the channel. All of it is really healthy for Pokemon Pocket. This ranked season as well, been absolutely phenomenal. And it's Monday as I record this, which means that tomorrow is going to be the Pokemon Presents. And if the rumors are correct, we should be getting some announcement of the A4 expansion, the next large update. The 2 dual booster packs, which are going to be coming to Pokemon Pocket probably sometime later next week. Again, all of that information should be coming tomorrow, which we will, of course, be making videos on. So this is a bit of a bittersweet type video. You know, this is kind of the last meta report, likely the last Meta Monday of this format. And then, of course, we're going to kind of go right into, you know, the next season and the next metagame, which is going to be absolutely incredible. I think it's going to be super fun. So these videos, whenever I make these at the end of the seasons, they're definitely a little bit different. I like to kind of come at things as less of like a week-to-week perspective and more of a perspective on the format as a whole, right? And we kind of look at everything over the last 3 or 4 weeks. In the case of this EEVEE Grove season, it's been about, or it will have been, a 4-week, like a full month-long season, which is actually the longest season that we've had so far in Pokemon Pocket, which is interesting. Last format, last season with Extra Dimensional Crisis, it was like barely 3 weeks, right? So it was like, you know, definitely a bit of a shorter season. This week it's different. And this season it's different. So anyway, guys, we're gonna go into the final standings, and then we'll take a look at the metagame data at the end. We'll dive into the deck list. There will be timestamps in this video, so feel free to jump around if you want to. But again, this isn't gonna be a super long, in-depth video. All of the deck lists that we're gonna be talking about today, we've discussed for quite some time now. So this is really gonna be kind of putting, you know, a bow on it, right? We're wrapping it up, and I'm actually quite excited to do that because then we kind of look ahead, we look forward, which is going to be fun. So anyway, Ursa Days Pocket Weekly number 35, there was about 600 people playing, which is very impressive for the end of the season. These were the final standings, and to be fair, you know, I wasn't able to really follow this tournament as it was going on over the weekend. Again, I was busy at a wedding, but coming back and then seeing the results, it was actually quite interesting. When I take a look here at the final standings, so we take a look here at like the top 16, which is on the screen right now. Very diverse, and it's very colorful. Just so much going on here, which is really cool to see. Again, I will say that the EEVEE Grove format this season, things have been as balanced, as spread out as we ever have been. One of the main things to take a look at is the diversity of the deck lists and the cards that are in all of these decks, but also how or where these cards come from, right? There's a massive variety of expansions, of booster packs, where all of these cards come from, and I think that's really healthy for the game. In first place, we've got Illuchian, I'm not sure, from the United States, been 12-2, playing Buzzwole Pheromosa. So yes, the deck that really kind of dominated last season was Buzzwole, coming here at the end and getting this dub at the end and getting first place. S0, Konar, I don't know how to say. I'm terrible with the names. Anyway, from the United States as well, double USA representation. Shout out to you guys. In second place, and he was playing Sylveon and Solgaleo. So if you remember last week, this new Solgaleo deck that was kind of a copy-paste of Charizard also got second place in last week's Ursa Days tournament. So back-to-back grand finals appearances for Solgaleo. Definitely very impressive. Probably the best version of Solgaleo that we've seen so far. In third place, we've got our old friend here, Charizard Sylveon. Probably the most ridiculous deck of this format, if we're being honest with you. Getting third place, going 11-2. And then here in fourth place, we do have Sylveon and Greninja. But, you know, not nearly as dominant for this particular deck list, Sylveon and Greninja, as the other decks. By the way, shout out to these players here from Spain and India. I'm not even going to try on the names. Tons of representation from a bunch of different countries. So congrats to all of those players. But Sylveon Greninja in fourth place, won the first 2 tournaments of this format, fell down a little bit. Last week, I believe it lost in the finals, or didn't even make finals. I kind of forget, honestly, but didn't win last week, and has kind of, you know, balanced out. It's certainly not as dominant as it was early on in the format, but anyway, a fourth place finish. Buzzwole yet again here in fifth place. Definitely impressive to have a first place and a fifth place finish, and if I look down, there's also a Buzzwole here at 10th place. It does feel like Buzzwole Pheromosa, with the heavy Oricorio influence over the last few days, as well as a lot of just basic Pokemon in general, and a lot more of slower decks being a bit more, I guess, dangerous in this format. Pheromosa really has kind of ended up being a little bit of a better option for sure. So first place, fifth place, and 10th place for Buzzwole, definitely impressive. And then we do have Flareon and Leafeon here at 6th place, but we also have them here at 12th place and 14th place. So certainly still a top deck of the format. Hasn't won anything. This might be one of the highest place finishes that we've seen for Flareon and Leafeon. Flareon Turtonator did get 2nd place at the first tournament of the season, but this particular version of Flareon, I don't think we've ever seen it playing super high at any large tournament, so definitely a good showing for this deck, one of my favorite decks of this format. Black Sun here, Black Yu Sun from Thailand, 9-3, was playing Sylvally Oricorio, seems to be the really only Sylvally representation here in the top 16, which is definitely interesting. Here's a Giratina and Darkrai, did win last week. There's one here at 8th place and another here at 15th place. Another Charizard here at 9th, another Buzzwole again at 10th, like we said. Here at 11th place, we do actually have Magnezone and Sylveon. Magnezone, definitely one of the more underrated decks of this format so far. Shout out to Jody, by the way. If you don't know who Jody is, he streams. He's one of the better players in the entire game. Makes great content as well on YouTube. You should go check him out. 8-3, 11th place there. Another Flareon, Leafeon, some more Sylveon, Greninja, Giratina, Darkrai, and then here at 16th place, we do see a Garchomp. So Garchomp did kind of sneak its way in there to top 16. Definitely one of the better fighting decks in the game right now. Both Rampardos decks really have fallen. They were pretty decent, I would say, sometime last week with the heavy amount of Oricorio flying around. But this week and as we kind of approach the end of the format, I really think the Rampardos fossil-based decks necessarily aren't as, I guess, quality or consistent as some of the other decks that we've seen really kind of emerge in the format. So just a tons of variety here. I would say there really is about 5 to 10 decks that you can all consider to be really top level decks in the format right now. The standings, I think, really do reflect that. Just a tons of variety. If we go down here, we do see an Arceus, Tapu, Koko. We even see a Greninja Oricorio right here. If we keep going, there's an Incineroar here at 33rd place. Definitely interesting. Here is a Turbo Sylvally here at 40th place. So lots of variety, tons of top decks in the format right now. Let's go ahead and dive into the deck lists and we'll talk a little bit about them. So this is going to be the first place deck. This is the winning Buzzwole deck, which again is categorized on Limitless as Buzzwole and Pheromosa. The Buzzwole decks have had a little bit of a struggle in terms of how they're categorized in terms of like the little icons, right? On the Limitless platform, but this is definitely akin to what we've really come to, become a bit more familiar with Buzzwole, which is, of course, 2 Lucamine, 2 Cyrus, 2 Ericus. That's pretty much the standard here. 2 Buzzwole, 2 Celesteela, 2 Pheromosa, and then 1 Kartana. Most Buzzwole decks are playing at least 1 copy of both of these particular Pokemon. They're both really strong in their own respects. Only 1 Leaf Cape, so no Rocky Helmet in here, nothing too crazy. Just 1 Leaf Cape. I don't know if the breakpoints are as relevant. It doesn't really matter with Charizard running around. It's going to one-shot everything on your particular board here, so that matchup's going to be tough no matter what. And I think that Leaf Cape is mostly for those other matchups for sure. 1 Mars, 1 red card. This deck does have a lot of room for trainer cards. You could, again, play maybe some extra tool cards, things like that. This player here in first place did elect to play some Hand Disruption, which again, I think in the format, at least right now, in this modern age of Pokemon Pocket, cards like Red Card and Mars are actually really phenomenal. Most of the top decks in the game, in fact, almost all of them, other than, of course, decks like this, are combo-based decks. They're rare candy decks, and these are decks that traditionally used to be sort of high-roll decks, like mid-range decks that had a high potential, but were a bit inconsistent. Now, very explosive because of the combo potential with rare candy. So one of the main ways to negate those deck lists, of course, is to play a lot of these Hand Disruption cards, things like Mars and things like Red Card. Basically back-to-back weeks, I believe, in this format. Every deck that has gotten first place so far this season has been playing numerous hand Disruption cards like Mars and Red Card, and I think that both of them are very, very strong. So here's Buzzwole. Am I surprised that Buzzwole got first place? Yes, I really am. I think that Fire has been very common in the format, whether that's Charizard, whether that's Flareon. Buzzwole traditionally has done well in a couple of common matchups, but struggled in quite a few. It's one of the few decks that can handle Oricorio quite decently. It's traditionally done well against things like Giratina, Darkrai. It's done well against its partner, sort of the sister deck there, Guzzlord, and it's also done well against something else that I am not, I guess, thinking about right now. I don't know off the top of my head. Sylvally, it's also done well against Sylvally. But Buzzwole typically does struggle against some of those larger Pokemon that are heavy hitters that can oftentimes either just live Buzzwole that have a ton of HP, things like those Stage 2 Pokemon with Lily, like Solgaleo, like a Charizard, things like that. Buzzwole's kind of struggled against, so to beat Solgaleo in the finals is very, very interesting. Of course, any deck can beat any deck on any given day, but definitely a surprise to see Buzzwole beating Solgaleo and Sylveon in the finals. But again, the 2 Cyrus, 2 Pheromosa, we can kind of target down those Sylveons. Maybe that was the win condition. I didn't watch the finals, but there is certainly a route there. Charizard still being one of the more popular decks of the format also makes me a bit surprised again that Buzzwole ended up getting first place. But as we've seen, Buzzwole is still, this whole sort of Grass Ultra Beast package is phenomenal. This was like a prepackaged deck that came in Extra Dimensional Crisis and immediately was one of the better decks in the history of Pokemon Pocket. This format, it floated around a little bit, but it never really ended up being maybe a top choice. Maybe in that second or third week there, it was definitely a top choice, but was never like a top S tier choice. So, you know, Buzzwole is an incredible deck list. Super consistent, very fast paced, very flexible in its win conditions. It kind of reminds me of the Greninja Giratina Sylveon deck, but a little bit more streamlined and a little bit less, I guess, explosive in that nature. Buzzwole only doing 120, no damage modifiers in this deck. We are reliant on things like Pheromosa to kind of, you know, fix a little bit of that math, right? That damage math. So interesting. The Buzzwole won this week. Definitely a surprise, but a pleasant surprise nonetheless. Solgaleo and Sylveon getting second place for the second week in a row. And this is going to be, again, that kind of copy-paste version of Charizard. Instead of the Giant Cape, we're playing Leftovers. Instead of Charizard and Charmander, we're playing Cosmog and Solgaleo. Of course, we got the 2-2 Sylveon line, and then instead of the Flareon, which Charizard runs, we're playing a Magearna, which does kind of create some awkwardness, right? A big reason why I believe that Charizard doesn't play like another basic Pokemon to use as counterplay to Oricorio, it plays Flareon, is because it's not a basic Pokemon. So when you're playing Charizard, you are very reliant on either leading with EV or Charmander in the active spot, and anything else would make the deck definitely a bit more inconsistent. However, Solgaleo doesn't have that issue with the Rising Road ability. We can afford to play a basic Pokemon that's not Cosmog or Eevee. Even if it's not useful in that matchup, it doesn't really matter because we don't ever have to attach an energy to it to get it out of the active spot. Solgaleo can come in for free, so I think that is a big reason why playing Magearna is important. We've seen some people switch to one copy of Lily and then double Sabrina, so I think that this is more out of necessity of counterplaying Oricorio. With Magearna and double Sabrina, the Oricorio matchup is actually not really that bad whatsoever. And again, midway through this format, it was really when the counter meta took over, if you remember us talking about it, and Oricorio definitely rose up to be one of the better options, really the only counter meta deck in the format. And a lot of the decks adjusted, and I think it really did balance out the metagame in a way where all of the decks were sort of pretty well balanced against each other. Solgaleo kind of took advantage of that. Certainly a deck that maybe not loves going up against Charizard, but actually has a decent chance against most of the decks of the format. So Magearna to Sabrina, we still have a Lily, and Guzma is a very interesting one. But again, something that also kind of makes a lot of sense to discard the Giant Capes from your opponent's Sylveon to allow Solgaleo to get those KOs, you know? So definitely an important, I guess, aspect of the deck list. Solgaleo, the stocks for Solgaleo ended up definitely going up a bit with Sylveon becoming one of the more popular cards of the format, if not the most popular card of the format. And then here in third place is Charizard. So I think we all know what Charizard is. We all know and love it. This is definitely playing one copy of Mars and Sabrina, so no Guzma or Red in this list. I've been advocating to replace the Mars for a Guzma or a Red, but again, you know, most people maybe aren't, I guess, catching on, or maybe they just want to play Mars because it is still a good card. But anyway, no surprise that Charizard was at the top of the standings this week. We've spoken about this deck a ton. It really is, in my mind, it's the strongest deck of this format. It never won in Ursiday's tournament, but it got pretty darn close a lot of weeks in a row. It was definitely one of the more dominant decks in ranked mode for quite some time. And I think in general, it's just the strongest deck in the game currently right now. I just think that Stoke Charizard is incredible, and Sylveon gives it way too much pace. So there's Charizard. We've already talked about it. The list doesn't change too much across the board. But anyway, I'm actually going to sneak a peek here at the 9th place list, which to me looks the exact same. Yeah, so this is, again, the standard Mars here instead of Red or Guzma. It is what it is. But yeah, Charizard is Charizard, man. Just a crazy, crazy deck. 4th place is going to be Sylveon and Greninja. And, you know, this is another list that I think has been nailed down. Most people have, I guess, really settled on a particular 20-card list, and that's what this deck is kind of showcasing. One thing I will say is that in the mirror matchup, I found that cutting out maybe a Mars or a Red card for something like an Irida is something that can definitely end up winning you the game there to kind of negate the damage of your opponents also playing Greninja. This is still one of the stronger decks of the format. In fact, we kind of put it in S tier the last couple of weeks on the tier list. The main reason for that is that it won back-to-back tournaments, Ursidays, in the beginning of the format, and has continued to be not only the most played deck, but one of the highest average win rate decks in the entire game. This week, a bit of a downturn for Sylveon. I mean, I say that it got 4th place, right? Sylveon Greninja, but is certainly one of the best decks in the game. Is it a solid S tier choice at this point, late in the season? It's hard to say. You know, it really is. But you know, if any deck has an S tier, I guess, qualification, it would still be this deck list, but it's definitely not, I guess, you know, so far ahead of all of the other decks in the format, which again is normal. You know, we typically talk about that on the channel. As the seasons go on, what we see is that, you know, a meta emerges and certain decks become very dominant. Then the counter meta emerges, and there's a lot of opportunities for the counter decks to become dominant. But then after that, everything ends up balancing out. And I think right now we're at the end of the season, and we're into that sort of balancing effect where a lot of the decks are, in general, pretty well balanced against each other, and there's just a wide variety of decks that could win at any given time, which I think this tournament really does well reflect. And here is Leafeon and Flareon. This list here, I think, is also pretty nailed down. I don't think that many people are changing around this deck much at all. We see the copy of red, the 2 copies of EEVEE back here. We do have 1 Sabrina, 1 red card. I don't know if these are always found in the deck, but those are, of course, very useful cards in any deck list. And then in terms of the Oricorio counter, we do see the Leafeon, the non-EX. There was a time where we were seeing a little bit more of the non-EX Flareon, like the same one that Charizard plays, the Genetic Apex one, in place of this Leafeon to counter Oricorio. The only downside, I do think that this Leafeon is better. The only downside to this particular version, playing this Leafeon as opposed to Flareon, is that we are reliant on using Leafeon EX to generate the grass energies for this Leafeon, or else it's just not able to attack, right? Because that's the only way we can get a grass energy on this thing. Whereas with Flareon, right, we're playing fire energies in the deck, so we can always get those 3 energies onto Flareon. It is a bit of a give and take, if we're being honest with you. So I don't know necessarily which one is better per se. They're both really strong. This, of course, is just playing the Leafeon, but yeah, definitely one of the more consistent based decks. Like it seemingly always kind of gets to where it wants to go. Definitely one of my favorite consistent tempo decks of the format. Really cool to have grass and fire in the same deck, right? I mean, you got to think, like, there's a lot of Pokemon in the format that are weak to grass. You know, your Garchomps, you know, your Rampardoses, things like that. Even Darkrai, so like some of those dark Pokemon are weak to grass. So there is an advantage to having grass Pokemon in your deck list for sure. Buzzwole takes advantage of that and across the board. And then Flareon, right, to hit Solgaleo for weakness and whatever, I guess, other Pokemon are potentially weak to fire, right? So Flareon is actually a bit one of the more underrated Pokemon, I think, in the game and throughout this entire season. It honestly ended up being quite a very decent Pokemon in this season. One of the better Pokemon in the game. I think we all knew that it would be kind of strong. Some people doubted it, but it's certainly really good. Here is Sylvally Oricorio in 7th place, so this is really the only Sylvally representation here at the top of the standings. And again, I do think that this is the best way to play Sylvally. We've said it time and time again. There was actually a point in time, like I said, in the 2nd or 3rd week of this format where I did feel like Sylvally and Oricorio was actually potentially the best deck in the game. It's just the best way to play Oricorio in my mind. It's the perfect blend of a very fast-paced, aggressive deck that is, again, just super fast-paced, but is also not playing EX Pokemon, which means you're a purely single-prize archetype, which fits very well with Oricorio. And again, Oricorio being sort of just the best control Pokemon, really the only control Pokemon in the game right now, with the Safeguard ability, just kind of pairs extremely well with Sylvally. This is still one of the better decks in the game right now. I don't expect us really to get different versions of Oricorio decks. I think for a while now, Sylvally will end up being probably the best partner for Oricorio, which I think is fine. I don't think that, I think Sylvally, I was a bit scared of it because it's so flexible being a colorless Pokemon. And then I thought we might be seeing a lot of Sylvally in a lot of different aspects, but it does seem that really the only, I guess, true top meta deck that incorporates Sylvally is Oricorio, and I think that it's interesting that these two Pokemon have found a strong partnership together, and in fact, I think that's fine, right? If this is really the version of Oricorio that we see in the future, I think that's fine, you know, and I think it's definitely a strong deck, but not anything that's too hard to overcome, right? So I think it's overall pretty healthy for the format. In 8th place here, we've got Giratina and Darkrai. So Giratina Darkrai went through, you know, a couple of different phases, a couple of awkward stages throughout this format. I think towards the end here, people really have just settled on it being classic Giratina Darkrai, right? We don't need any of the poison package, you know, bells and whistles. We don't need any crazy Kamala attack to get over Oricorio. We're kind of just cutting our losses with Giratina Darkrai and just being okay playing potentially the most consistent deck in all of Pokemon Pocket, the real ramp deck, probably the greatest deck of all time, right? If we're looking at the numbers, if we're looking at the longevity of decks, I think we talked about it last week when it won the Ursa Days tournament, that it is probably the top deck in the history of Pokemon Pocket. Always a strong choice. And really the only decks that have hard countered Giratina Darkrai throughout its history have been things maybe like Charizard, right? Which can kind of live in attack and then one and KO anything. So decks like that, but also Oricorio. But you know, in this format, Oricorio decks are a little bit more aggression based and less sort of based around sustain. And I think that that a big reason for that is because of all of the other decks in the format that are a little bit faster paced. So because of that, Oricorio decks aren't necessarily a hard counter to Giratina and Darkrai anymore, which really has kept Giratina Darkrai, from falling out of the metagame. So it's still here. It's still a top deck. And I know that some people are going to love playing it. There's something about playing a deck that plays only 2 Pokemon, that are only 2 basic Pokemon, that are strong independently from each other, but work really well together. And it's just sort of the perfect combination. I do think that Giratina kind of carries this deck list. I think that 2 of the top decks of the format, being Giratina Darkrai and Sylveon Greninja, are really centered around Giratina. So I think that Giratina might find a different home in the subsequent formats. Like I said, in this format, Giratina is probably the best Pokemon, but it sees play in a different deck, right? So I think Giratina EX itself is the breadwinner here for this list, but this is certainly a very strong version of it for sure. Less of a high roll deck, more of just a super consistent kind of ramp-based deck as opposed to Sylveon and Greninja. But Giratina is going to be around for a long time. I don't really see Giratina getting power crept. The only way Giratina falls out of the format is if there is maybe a direct sort of counter to it that's a dark type. But it's interesting because one of the more popular partners to Giratina is a dark type Pokemon in its own degree. So anyway, Giratina Darkrai is pretty crazy. We already took a look at this Charizard list. Let's, I guess, take a look at the 10th place Buzzwole deck here, which again is basically the exact same. Instead of, I think, what is it, red card, we're playing 2 Leaf Capes. So again, we're just kind of dipping out of the hand disruption pot a little bit and going a little bit more into the sustain aspect of Buzzwole, which is a very underrated aspect of it. I think that a big reason why Buzzwole hasn't become literally the only deck anyone ever plays is because of things like Charizard, right? Charizard really is the only direct counter to Buzzwole, and I think it's the only reason Buzzwole isn't the only deck to play. Its consistency, its ability to conserve energies while healing a ton. Leaf Cape plus 30 HP, Erika's to heal 50. We've got bench sniping, we've got Cyrus, we've got energy conservation with Lusamine. This deck list really does have it all, right? We can get around to Oricorio. We can do basically anything other than live an attack from Stoke Charizard, and I think that's the only downside to Buzzwole. The only thing kind of holding it back, although it did get first place this week, and it was the best deck of the previous format, I think that as long as Charizard stays around, Buzzwole won't kind of run away with things. So anyway, Buzzwole is really, really strong. Let's take a look here at Jody's list here in 11th place, which is Magnezone and Sylveon. Probably one of the decks that, in my mind, just sort of always deserved to see more play. I spoke very highly about it this entire format. It's been in A tier this entire time, and I think it's still an A tier deck, but back-to-back weeks throughout really this entire format, Magnezone is probably the least represented A-tier deck in the meta shares week after week. It just isn't a deck that I think a lot of people are as excited to play, but it's very unique in the sense that it's playing a Stage 2 non-EX Pokemon with an EX Pokemon that isn't an attacking Pokemon per se, and of course, isn't a rare candy deck. So that's sort of what's unique about Magnezone, which I always liked about it. And in the format right now, in the economy now with so much rare candy, Magnezone really does kind of feel like a red herring, or excuse me, I hit my microphone there. It definitely just feels like the odd man out, and I think it's kind of unique in that sense. This deck also plays dual energies, which is pretty cool. I haven't gone through the energies for these deck lists. I've done them in a bunch of previous videos, so I guess we'll go through it. This deck's playing grass energies. This deck's playing dark energies, electric energies. This deck is playing pure fire energies. This deck is playing psychic and water energies mostly. This deck is playing fire energies. And this deck list is playing metal energies, and this deck is playing grass, of course. So anyway, there you go. This deck list plays both electric and psychic, which is pretty cool. Magneton can generate electric energy, so we have a little bit more of some lenience in terms of getting those electric energies, so we can play dual, which is cool because we can attack with Sylveon, and of course we can attack with Tapu Lele, which is, again, a bit of a little spicy inclusion that this deck list kind of threw in here over the last few weeks. So one Tapu Lele, one Cyrus. We can target a bench Pokemon, and we can kind of bring it up with Cyrus and take some KOs. We can also just take KOs with Pokemon that retreat to the bench with Tapu Lele. So one copy of it, I think, is correct. Last week, the highest placing Magnezone deck was playing 2 copies of Tapu Lele for consistency purposes. I don't think it's necessarily that great. Tapu Lele saw play in the previous formats. I think it kind of fell out of favor mainly because of Sylvally. Last format, Sylvally came through and just sort of dominated, and a little bit too fast-paced and aggressive in the early game for Tapu Lele to really contend. The Tapu Lele decks really liked to kind of just park Tapu Lele in the active spot and take advantage of a lot of those slower ramp decks, which weren't really doing any significant damage. Early in the game when Sylvally came through, that changed things, definitely. So Tapu Lele was gone for a little bit of time, but has found its way into at least this deck list, which is cool, because it's definitely a very, very good Pokemon. So yeah, I like this deck. Magnezone has always been a counter to the non-EX Pokemon that are strong in the format. It's really been the niche. It was strong against Meowscarada a couple formats ago, and now it's does really well against Sylvally, which is, of course, a popular deck in the format. So I like Magnezone. I really do. Giant Cape on it gives it a lot of HP, and 160 is a lot of HP. That's a lot for sure. Basically makes it an EX Pokemon, if we're being honest with you. So I like Magnezone. I think it'll always have value, and I think that that's definitely one of the more underrated decks of this format, if we're being honest with you. Let's skip down ahead to 16th place and take a look at Garchomp, because Garchomp was something that, again, never really took off. I think going into the second week, it really rose in popularity, had really high win rates, taking advantage of really everything that else was common in the format. But again, everything sort of balanced out as time went on, and I think that this is definitely what I always call like a pile. You know, when I say a deck is a pile, I mean, it's literally just a bunch of cards thrown in, you know, and you're just like, maybe we'll draw them all and maybe we'll be really strong. But the odds are that this deck is just going to draw a bunch of cards that you don't need. We call that bricking. This is definitely a brick worthy deck. It's going to do a lot of nothing sometimes, but certainly is extremely strong when it does do stuff. What's interesting about this Garchomp deck is that it doesn't really have room to play Cyrus. You know, traditionally in this deck list, we weren't playing the Sylveon line and we were playing Cyrus. And I think that some people are still on that train, right? They're sacrificing a little bit of the draw power with even the one copy of Sylveon, and they're just ended up playing you know, Cyrus, which is typically what would see play in this deck list. So, you know, it's on the fence a little bit. I don't even know how much Garchomp and Rampardos has really benefited from Sylveon, but the cool thing about EEVEE Grove is that we got this copy of EEVEE, like the EEVEE that everybody plays, which draws a card, right? So playing a Pokemon that for 1 energy draws a card when you can evolve it into a Pokemon that draws you 2 cards is just pretty cool. So even, you know, just playing EEVEE is kind of worth it in your deck, to be honest. So yeah, Garchomp is Garchomp. Again, I just think in general the fighting decks were a little bit lackluster this format, more popular early on, and certainly good counterplay to Oricorio, but not something that I think is like super high tier in the format. Let's go down to 26th place and we'll see the highest placing Greninja Oricorio deck, which, you know, is something that I've never, to be fair, I've never ranked it too high in this format. I think it's really just a mix between, you know, the Greninja Sylveon Giratina deck that sees play without Oricorio, and then, of course, all of the Oricorio decks like, you know, Sylvally Oricorio and things like Magnezone Oricorio, things like that. So it's kind of like you would think kind of the best of both worlds, but again, similar to Garchomp, it is kind of a pile, a lot of different Pokemon going around. I mean, if you take a look at all of the, like, sort of the final forms of our Pokemon, we have 2 Greninja, 2 Oricorio, 1 Sylveon, 1 Giratina. So there's going to be a lot of times where, like, we just don't have the Pokemon that we need to do something. This is a deck that plays water and electric energies, so we're not playing psychic energies, which means that Giratina is useless unless we get it down on our board early. And because of that, it really feels like this deck is lacking a lot of, you know, I guess power, you know, like just the ability to do damage is definitely underrated in Pokemon Pocket. A lot of the best decks can just kind of hit you for like 130 plus, which, you know, is certainly pretty relevant. But yeah, it is a deck list. I don't think we've ever ranked this deck super high on the tier list, mainly because its representation has been quite low, but also its win rates have been pretty low. So it is definitely one of those sort of fringe, like B tier decks that always has the opportunity to do well, and certainly oftentimes played by good players, quality players, but just not something that's, you know, super dominant or very, very common. Lastly, let's take a look here at Arceus and Tapu Koko, and then we'll take a look here at Incineroar EX, because these are 2 kind of interesting cases of this season for sure. So here's Arceus and Tapu Koko. Again, one of my favorite decks in the entire game. I thought that this deck, honestly, there was a chance for, in ranked mode at least, I thought was the best choice for like a solid week. The thing with this deck is that, of course, it's very similar to Sylvally, Oricorio, and Zeraora, which really means that most people are just going to play Sylvally or Oricorio in Zeraora. They're not going to play Tapu Koko and Arceus. In theory, it does make more sense. Like, you know, you're playing purely single prize Pokemon, so that way your opponent has to take 3 KOs. But, you know, in general, I think that Tapu Koko is a bit of a more impressive, aggressive Pokemon, right? If you're going second, it's absolutely incredible. Zeraora going first is really, really strong. We have the Giovannis, we have the electrical cords to then set up Arceus, and of course, we've got Oricorio. So this deck list functions very, very well, and I love it. It's one of my favorite decks in the entire game. Unfortunately for this deck, a lot of, by the time this deck really kind of came into its own, a lot of the other top decks in the game were kind of ready to counterplay Oricorio, and I think that, you know, really did knock this deck down a peg as quickly as it kind of came into the meta game, but definitely one of my favorite decks in the entire game. When you take a look at the overall like meta for this season, this is the only deck playing Arceus, which I think is pretty unique. Arceus did find its way into a deck this format, which again, you know, does go back to like my point of like how many different Pokemon from so many different booster packs are seeing play. I mean, if you count them all up, if you count all of like the top 10 decks of the format, Like you see that all of those decks are playing so many different Pokemon from like basically almost every booster pack that we've gotten so far. I'm trying to think, like the only booster pack that doesn't really have any Pokemon that sees play might be, I'm trying to think, it might be Space Time Smackdown. I don't know if any Space Time Smackdown Pokemon see play. No Palkia or Dialga at least. Although no, because the Darkrai I think is from Space Time Smackdown. Mythical Island maybe, because Garchomp and Mew and Celebi don't see play, so maybe Mythical Island is the odd man out there, but I think I'm missing something from Mythical Island that is still seeing play, but like almost everything else has representation in the format, which is definitely really cool. I mean, you know, Greninja's from Genetic Apex, right? So there you go, and like the Flareon is also from Genetic Apex, so yeah, I just think there's a ton of Pokemon that see play from a bunch of different booster packs, which is pretty cool. Lastly, let's take a look at Incineroar, which uniquely actually did go 8-1, which, you know, is a better record than basically all of these other decks above it. But, you know, the point structure, I don't actually know why this player here with 24 points is ranked so low, because they should be up here. So I don't know what Limitless did here. Maybe he just dropped from the tournament or something, or maybe, I don't know. This is weird, right? Why does he have 24 points? Anyway, 33rd place Bodhi here, but I feel like he should be definitely higher in the standings anyway, going 8-1, is Incineroar. And, you know, this is going to be straight Incineroar. So this is something that was actually pretty common at the beginning of the format. When HOW was released, I think a lot of people realized that, you know, it would buff, you know, all of the, you know, Incineroar decks and Decidueye decks, and it did, but those decks weren't really good enough. I think that a big reason why Incineroar stopped seeing so much play early on was because Charizard with Sylveon just made more sense, and Sylveon does pair better with Charizard than it does with Incineroar. So when we play Incineroar, we're kind of forced to play like either Turtonator, but again, that's awkward because we're also playing Kiawe, which means we don't really have a lot of room for all of the other cards we want to run. And it does kind of force you to play just straight Incineroar, which, you know, in general isn't a very consistent deck, right? There's just not a lot of options. All of the other Stage 2 decks in the game that are playing Rare Candy are playing Sylveon, or they're playing you know, other Pokemon that can also evolve with Rare Candy, like Rampardos, Garchomp, things like that. So Incineroar really is the odd man out. There's just not a great partner for it, and you kind of have to just play Incineroar, which in general does make the deck a bit inconsistent, and I think that that's a big reason why it kind of fell off, but it is really strong. I mean, if you do get into the line, if you're going second and you lead Litten, and then you go into Incineroar turn 2, like, it's tough to deal with, especially with the extra damage with HOW and the healing with Lily and everything. I mean, it is a crazy deck. When it works. It just doesn't work very often. But anyway, Incineroar, 24 points, 8-1 is certainly pretty impressive. I'm not really sure why it was this far down in the standings. Maybe just an error here on the Limitless platform, because it should be here like in top 16, basically, right? All the other decks in top 16 at 24 points. So I don't know. Interesting nonetheless. But yeah, that's it, guys. That's all of the highest placing decks of the format right now, and there was quite a few. And like I said, I think this format this season was very well balanced, and it's really fun to see. You know, I think I'll be actually kind of sad when this format goes and we go into the next one. However, I will be extremely excited because tomorrow, when we see the announcement for all of the new cards, we can start theory crafting. We can talk about the new strategies and the new interactions. It's going to be absolutely incredible. I mean, I am so excited. I think that most people get definitely more hype for the full expansions, like, you know, the A1, A2, A3, A4, as we're about to get. Then they do the mini sets, and the mini sets are cool, and they definitely kind of sprinkle in some new flavors to the format, but it doesn't usually feel like that big of a hit, you know? Like when A3 came out, you know, we had Solgaleo, and we had all the other really strong Pokemon that came in. We had Oricorio, and we also had Rare Candy. It was a massive shift to the metagame, and I think we're going to see an equally massive shift in the way that Pokemon Pocket even works. You know, the general like baseline function of the game, I think will change pretty dramatically as we go into A4. So I'm really excited to see, you know, what happens there. It's gonna be really fun. I'm super excited for tomorrow. So again, stay tuned. We're gonna be making videos about that. Okay, next up, we're gonna go into the metagame tab pretty quickly. Again, you know, a lot of this metagame data, we're at the end of the season. It's not gonna be like super relevant because it's not really leading into anything, but it is always really interesting to take a look at. So let's dive right in here. So the #1 most played deck of the format, still Sylveon and Greninja here at 17% meta share, but that's actually a pretty significant drop off from about 23% last week, but it did still have a 50% win rate. Basically went 295 to 280 with 11 ties. And that's impressive, you know. I mean, again, still for a deck list that has fallen a bit, but is still the most played deck, to have above 50% win rate is definitely impressive, but definitely a decline. You know, again, we're seeing a much more balanced metagame here. Giratina Darkrai overtook Charizard as the second most played deck, 13% of the meta share. Still very dominant, and it did, again, have about a 50% win rate, 230 to 216 plus 18, so that puts it technically below 50%, but a pretty decent outing for Giratina Darkrai. That's about what we would expect. Charizard, the third most played deck, 11% meta share. had a pretty high win rate, 216 to 183 with 5 ties. That's a 53.5% win rate. So Charizard did end up being just a quality deck, and I think that's because so many of the decks below it really were kind of weak to Charizard, you know, like Magnezone can struggle, RC's Tapu Koko can struggle, you know, Buzzwole, Flareon, and Sylveon, Greninja, Giratina, Darkrai. I mean, a lot of the most played decks of the format actually kind of do lose to Charizard, which is interesting for sure. But one of the higher win rates actually in terms of all of the top decks of the format. So a good week for Charizard. Hasn't won a tournament or an Earth Today's tournament yet. Won a ton of small tournaments. Definitely one of the better decks. But yeah, third most played deck, one of the higher win rates. Flareon, Leafeon did struggle a bit, 109 to 116. So, you know, again, it's a very consistent deck, but its positioning in the format never was that good. In fact, I'm actually quite surprised to see it be the 4th most played deck, mainly because I don't really feel like it's that good. Like it's a good deck. It's a solid A tier deck, but I mean, like, you know, I don't know. It's tough. It's definitely tough. I don't consider it to be like a top tier deck, but it is pretty quality, even though it did kind of struggle a little bit, you know, but so did Sylvally Oricorio with 5% of the meta share, had a 46% win rate, and then Tapu Koko had a 43% win rate, and so good Solgaleo. So all of these decks really did struggle. However, Buzzwole, though, did do really well, 7% of the meta here, 133 to 103. So definitely a good week for Buzzwole, which is, again, kind of interesting, but probably did pretty decent against the 2 most played decks of the format, and I think the uptick of Giratina Darkrai definitely probably opened things up for Buzzwole, which traditionally does have a good matchup there, definitely. So yeah, Solgaleo did get 2nd place again, 50 and 63. These are smaller sample sizes now, but a 43.5% win rate isn't that great. Garchomp as well, 35 and 41. Small sample size, that's a -6 wins there, but 46% win rate. Sylveon Magnezone, though, 36 and 32, so it did go on a positive win streak. Sylvally Rampardos, 11 and 25. By far the least impressive performance here, I suppose, for you know, Sylvally Rampardos, which again, you know, I think that it really isn't a good enough deck, I think, towards the end of the season here. But all of these decks here, in my mind, are quality. Like, if you take a look, so what is this, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So at least 10 decks in the meta right now are like legitimate decks that all have potential to win. And that's really cool. And they're all really different, and they all incorporate different Pokemon, which is definitely unique, right? Other than Sylveon, you know, Sylveon definitely sees playing a lot of them. But yeah, a lot of diversity in the metagame. Guzzlord here, definitely massive fall off. People just not choosing to play it. Didn't do super well. There's a Leafeon and EEVEE deck here. I wonder, actually. I'm really curious. Is this... Okay, no, this is just a different flavor of the other deck. Okay, it's just one copy of Flareon instead. I wonder if that was like the, yeah, okay. I was curious if this was like the Oricorio Leafeon deck that I built the other week ago, which is still a good one. But anyway, yeah. Oh, here it is. Sylveon Jolteon, went 7 and 7. So shout out to them. Okay. So yeah, let's wrap it up here, guys. So this was gonna be, you know, a bit of a quick Meta Monday. Again, one thing I will say, and I probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, is that, you know, even when seasons are wrapping up, you might think that the information that you get from the meta reports and stuff is less useful because we're going into a new season, there's new cards, and a lot of that stuff might not translate. But that's not the case. It really isn't. What you oftentimes will see is that when the next set comes around and the next season starts, a lot of the best decks in the game are going to be the decks that have been tried and tested and proven from the previous format. And that's just the reality of it. If you go back to the beginning of this format, the decks that performed better than almost anything were the Oricorio decks, Giratina, Darkrai, and of course Buzzwole. Like, those were the decks that were just doing really well. Sylvally Rampardos as an example. And then later on, down the line, you know, the new decks and get figured out, and of course things change. But early on, like if you take a look at the top decks of this format, I would not be shocked, right? In the first week of next season, Sylveon Greninja is still going to be good. Giratina Darkrai is still going to be good. Charizard is still going to be good. So these are deck lists that you got to keep in mind, especially if you don't get all of the new cards really early on, or if there's not a clear top favorite new deck which pops into the metagame. These are going to be still really strong choices. But let's take a look at the day 2 meta real quick, and we will see that Charizard was actually the highest representation deck here in day 2, which is quite interesting, right? Actually tied with Sylveon and Greninja. So the day 2 conversion rates were quite high, definitely increases for these two decks. Also an increase for Giratina and Darkrai as well, and definitely an increase for Buzzwole. Buzzwole by far did the best out of any of the decks, although Flareon and Leafeon also did do well. So there's that. And then Solgaleo, this one Solgaleo player that made day 2 ended up going 5 and 1, making it into finals, which is impressive. You know, it really is. But Yeah, Charizard, you know, sub 50 win rate. Sylveon Greninja sub 50 win rate. Giratina Darkrai sub 50 win rate. So, you know, day 2 is an interesting thing to take a look at, right? Because it is definitely a much more condensed version of the metagame, but what it showcases to me oftentimes is how important matchups are when it comes to the final standings. I always tell this to people, you know, don't take a look at the decks that get first place in the tournament necessarily only, because there's a lot of factors that contribute to a deck winning a tournament. You want to take a look at the data, the win rates, and all of that stuff that really tells the full story, because the matchups are really what kind of determines which decks win which tournaments, you know, and a lot of that is a bit about variance and luck, to be honest with you, right? So yeah, anyway, the day 2 metagame is quite interesting. A lot of decks in day 2, though, you know, quite a few, which is definitely pretty cool to see. So anyway, guys, there it is. There is probably the last Meta Monday of this format. Tomorrow, the Pokemon Presents come out. We're going to get the new trailer, probably get some showcase of the new cards. I believe the leaks, or I guess the expectation, is that it's going to be a Generation 2 themed set. So we will be getting the Lugia and Ho-Oh, which I'm super excited about. Super excited about, because I think that those cards are not only going to be absolutely incredible, but it's going to be really cool to Pokemon Pocket. And I think we're going to get some massive cards that really shake up the game in the meta and how things work. So I'm really excited for all of that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just that's the theory, the running theory right now in the community, which would be certainly really cool. So stay tuned for that. More news tomorrow. Stay tuned for make sure you watch the Pokemon Presents. The video that I'll put out about it later will come out, at the same time around 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll kind of go in depth about all of that stuff, but definitely watch it live, and I would love to hear your guys' reactions for sure. It's going to be super fun. So anyway, guys, let's get out of here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Definitely subscribe. We're almost at 30,000 subscribers, which is really cool, and you're definitely going to want to stay tuned for all of the news and info about all of the new cards and stuff that's coming, because that's going to be pretty cool. It's going to be a big deal. Yeah, I don't got much else to say. Probably the last Meta Report of EEVEE Grove, and it's been a fun one. It's been a fun season. Thanks everybody for sticking around, and thank you everybody for watching today's video. Let's get out of here, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later, and yeah, bye.